So katoa, nau mai haere mai ki tēnei hui o te kaunihira o ngā roto o Rotorua. Good morning everybody and welcome to this meeting. Today we're going to be talking about local waters done well. Just a reminder to everyone that this is being live streamed. Fantastic that we have people presenting to us by Zoom. We appreciate your time. Before we get underway, I'll just open us up with a brief karakia. Tui taua mai I runga, tui taua mai I raro. Tui taua mai I roto, tui taua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Well, good morning everyone, and to those joining us by Zoom, I'm Mayor Tania Tapsell, and we have our councillors around the table. What we'll do in today's presentations is we're going to start off with Jaron Shaw, the Chief Advisor of Local Water Done Well from DIA, and then we'll go to Andy, the General Manager, Infrastructure and Regulation from the Commerce Commission, and then we'll head to our team at Taumata Arowai to get a presentation from them, including Alan when he joins us shortly. Following a brief morning tea break, we'll then go into a Rotorua Lakes Council presentation. This topic is very important not only to us in our community, but also a big conversation that's happening across the country. So I do really acknowledge and appreciate the time of our presenters this morning. And just a reminder to our elected members, the purpose of this workshop is an update for us, and that's on the modelling of the water services delivery options under this government's Local Waters Done Well reform program. Feedback will be sought from elected members on a preferred option, which we will then take to community consultation. So rest assured to our community, there will be an opportunity for you to provide feedback as well. So without further ado, we will head to our first presenter, and I do apologise, we have apologies from Councillor Maxwell, who is attending a funeral at the moment. But Jaron, it's our pleasure to hand over to you, and we can see you on the screen, and what we'll do is we'll let you finish your presentation, and then we'll open up for any questions, if that's okay with you.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship, Mayor Tapsell, kia ora, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. As Mayor Tapsell introduced, my name is Jaron Shaw. I'm a Chief Advisor here at DIA, working on Local Water Done Well. I've been working on water reform for the best part of the prior 3 years. Originally as part of the National Transition Unit under the previous government's Three Waters program. And more recently on the council implementation side of Local Water Done Well. My specific focus has been on delivery model, design and financing arrangements, but obviously through that work get to touch all aspects of the program. Great to be here with you today to talk through a general update, firstly on Local Water Done Well, which I'll move through reasonably quickly. Andrew has also asked me to cover some of the key outtakes from some recent modelling that we have completed for a regional model within the Bay of Plenty, and then I'll allow plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. If you bear with me momentarily while I share my screen. And if I can just confirm that that's on the screen now.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank you. So as I mentioned, I'll start with a general update. So councils are moving at pace to implement our Local Water Done Well policy. In December, the third Local Water Done Well bill was introduced to Parliament. We also welcomed a new local government minister last month. And he's been very clear in his expectation with us that momentum should continue. So it's very much business as usual for us. The Water Services Authority, who you will hear from today, has started consultation on the proposed national wastewater standards, one of the key areas provided for in the bill. And of course, we're seeing councils gathering pace in the development of their water service delivery plans, considering options for future water service delivery arrangements and making decisions ahead of public consultation. But today I'll focus on where we're currently at, some of the common themes we're hearing through our engagement with councils on the water plans. And as I mentioned, I'll touch briefly on some of the modelling we recently completed at the request of the Bay of Plenty Mineral Forum. So on the screen is a broad timeline that we've shared with councils throughout the development of water service delivery plans. I won't spend too much time here, but what it does is it breaks down the 12 months that councils have to complete water service delivery plans into logical phases with activities in those phases. And as you can see, we're currently in the third column where councils are starting to make decisions on preferred delivery models and options to take through to consultation. So your council's right on track in terms of consideration of your potential future arrangements. And if we cast forward to the subsequent phases, obviously as we draw closer to the 3rd of September this year, those plans will need to be finalised for submission to the Department on the 3rd of September for Department's review. So I'll just work through some of the key things we're hearing in our engagement with councils. We know that there are a number of questions, and as councils get further into detail and further into the consideration of the pros and cons of different approaches, it's natural for a number of detailed questions to emerge. So starting with the top item, we're considering continuing with in-house delivery. What are the implications of this? So in-house delivery is an option for councils to consider and to choose to take forward. However, I need to be clear that the status quo is not an option. New laws and regulations require a new approach to managing and delivering water services. Providers of water services will have to operate more like other utilities that are important to people's lives, like electricity and telecommunications companies. Like those other utilities, local government water services will be subject to economic regulation by the Commerce Commission, who are also joining me today to talk to you about the economic regulation regime. And this will add a new level of oversight for what is an essential service for your community. There will be greater emphasis on water services providers meeting environmental and water quality regulatory requirements to ensure that water services are safe, reliable and resilient for people and the environment. Water service providers will have to operate differently than they currently do following these new requirements. And this is about ensuring water services are treated with a special focus and separate to other council business to ensure they're cost effective and financially sustainable. Secondly, we often hear from councils questions around proposed wastewater standards, and obviously Ellen and team will be able to talk to this in more detail. But when it comes to implications for your water service delivery plans, what we recommend is that when you are developing cost estimates for your water service investment programs and your plans, we encourage you to consider your current and future regulatory compliance. The base case should ideally be the current investment program in your long-term plan, but you can factor in the impact of the proposed national wastewater standards. Proposed standards are expected to have an impact on costs of consenting, design and commissioning of wastewater treatment plants. And the specific cost savings will depend on individual circumstances, such as the type or size of the plant, treatment processes and options for where the plant discharges. And the Water Services Authority, Taumata Arawai, have provided case studies around estimates that councils could save in consenting costs under the proposed standards. And we're encouraging councils to look at their asset management plans and understand where those savings can be realised and make informed estimates based on those proposed new standards. And thirdly, what are the benefits of joining together with other councils to deliver water services? The multi-council CCOs have the benefit of creating a structure that's both cost-effective and operationally efficient, particularly for councils that serve smaller communities. By working together, they'll be able to pool resources, operate more efficiently, improve access to financing and importantly keep costs down for customers. There are also broader benefits such as greater investment certainty and the opportunity to build a strong future workforce. Having a separate water organisation also enables councils to move and refinance your water services separate from your own council balance sheets, improving your individual council's financial sustainability and resilience. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the Bay of Plenty modelling example that I'll share. And that has the potential to create substantial borrowing headroom for councils, meaning that you may be able to invest in other priorities for your communities. So fourthly, does setting up a new water organisation mean our council will lose control of your water assets? So not necessarily. It depends on how councils choose to set up the water organisation and what is transferred through your transfer agreement. So councils can transfer the ownership of assets to the water organisation, but maintain ownership as the shareholder or shareholders if it's a joint model. You can choose to retain those assets and transfer responsibilities for things like management and maintenance while retaining that ownership. You may consider a trust, although in our travels around the country we're not aware of any councils actively considering or pursuing trust arrangements, but that would result in the transfer of assets to the consumer trust if that model were pursued. And if a CCO model were pursued by councils, water organisations would be accountable back to you as council owners and shareholders, and the councils would be accountable back to your community for the performance of the organisation you own. As owners and shareholders, councils have a number of levers for influencing the water organisation. For example, you appoint and remove board members, you set expectations and priorities, there are a statement of expectations that the water organisation must give effect to, and you participate in the development of the new water services strategy and monitor performance of the organisation. So from a governance, accountability and control perspective, as a shareholding council of a water organisation, you have a number of levers to exercise control and influence. Now, next on the list is, will joining with other councils mean that we end up subsidising the costs of water services for other communities? And the answer to that is no, not necessarily. So it is up to councils in joint arrangements to decide how to set your prices initially, and that can and should reflect the realities of each region. Regional differences in prices can reflect regional differences in investment, borrowings and costs of service, as cost savings and efficiency are realised over time. Because of working together, councils may choose to harmonise prices, but you can do this when it suits your communities. And also the Commerce Commission will likely have a longer term role to play in terms of price harmonisation as well. The next on the list is, what are the consultation requirements for future water service delivery models, and why do they differ in the local government water services bill? So this is a question that has come up a lot recently, particularly with the introduction of the bill in December, which is currently before the Select Committee. So I'll talk about the current Preliminary Arrangements Act that was introduced in September 24, which is the existing legislation that broadly described applies to water service delivery plans. Under the current Act, there are streamlined provisions for consultation. They require councils as a minimum to consult on your anticipated or proposed delivery model and to include information on at least one alternative you have considered. So those are the minimum requirements. You can obviously exceed those requirements if you choose to, but those are the minimum. So those requirements apply even if you're intending to retain your current delivery arrangements. Where the consultation requirements differ under Bill 3, which is currently before the committee, there are clauses that relate to future decisions. Excuse me, my notes have just gone off. There are clauses that relate to future decisions about water service delivery, rather than the implementation of decisions that have already been made as part of a water service delivery plan. And those future requirements, i.e., councils choose to make changes to water service delivery 5 years' time, 10 years' time in the future, under those arrangements, you would require 3 options to have been considered and consulted on. So we've got a difference between the here and now immediate requirements around water service delivery plans, even in the future enduring settings that will apply. And lastly, do CCOs really work? So we receive a lot of questions around the performance and efficacy of CCOs. I'll start with what I think is the most relevant example, water care. Water care, as you all know, is a council-controlled organisation delivering drinking water and wastewater services to 1.7 million people across Auckland region. And in terms of performance, it is an exemplar of water service delivery performance, so it's more than doubled its annual rate of capital investment in the past 5 years, currently spending approximately $1 billion in capital investment. The majority of its projects, i.e. 70% plus, are delivered on time and on budget, which compares very favourably to the national average. Watercare's tariffs are amongst the lowest in the country, increasing on average by 6% per year since 2019. Watercare has 100% compliance with the Water Service Authority against the national average of 43%. And amongst the lowest levels of water leakage and consumption in the country. Watercare is also in the process of financial separation from Auckland Council, with economic regulation commencing from 1st of July this year. So it is not a perfect organisation, but in terms of performance, it is a resounding success. And the background of Watercare, essentially was initially formed prior to the Super City amalgamation and then refined further as part of those Super City reforms in Auckland in 2010 and 2011. Just changing tack slightly, as I mentioned at the outset, Andrew asked me to summarise some of the key outtakes from some recent analysis DIA's completed for the Bay of Plenty region. So this was a request that came to us through the Bay of Plenty Mayoral Forum. And in simple terms, the request was to complete some financial analysis. So it is strictly financially focused, this analysis on the benefits of 6 councils in the Bay of Plenty region working together. We've also looked at a sub-regional model, but essentially the key insights are very similar. So both of those reports are obviously available to you in full. I'll just go through some of the key highlights today. So a Bay of Plenty water CCO, the key summary is it could deliver water services at lower costs to consumers than can be achieved by the individual councils. It can do this because it can access more debt financing than councils through the LGFA, and that enables an immediate uplift in access to funding, enables the costs of assets to be spread over their useful lives, and provides additional cash reserves and flexibility. The Bay of Plenty Water CCO would ensure financially sustainable water services provision to customers, provide resilience, and enable uplifts in water services infrastructure investment over time. And establishing a water CCO enables the refinancing of water services borrowings of council balance sheets, which would result in a material improvement in the financial sustainability and resilience of participating councils by creating substantial borrowing headroom for those councils that can allow general rates to be reduced or other investment priorities to be incorporated. Again, I want to emphasise that those benefits can be realised without requiring price harmonisation. In fact, the analysis, which I'll move on to next, assumes there is no price harmonisation or cross-subsidisation between councils, Obviously, if this joint model were advanced, there could be further discussions and those assumptions may shift, but at the outset we've assumed no cost subsidisation at all. These are just snips from the report directly, which is why the slide looks a bit messy. But I just want to draw your attention. In the first table in particular, you can see the average water services charges across Bay of Plenty in the third to bottom row. And then below that highlighted, you can see the savings generated by the Bay of Plenty Water CCO against the LTP financial projections. So we use LTP financial projections as the basis of this analysis. Obviously they can be updated as things change, but as the status quo delivery option, that is our best source of information. And then in the bottom row there you can see savings as a percentage of long-term average charge, essentially increasing from 0% in year 1 through to 16% savings in year 10 with an overall average of an 8% price reduction. In the second table, that concerns the borrowing headroom created at an individual council level by essentially working together towards a joint water services CCO. And if you look at the first highlighted area, or the area highlighted by the red box, essentially what that demonstrates is Rotorua Lakes' current water debt, as we understand it to be from LTPs and our work directly with your council officers over a 10-year period. Essentially, that water debt, if transferred to another water entity, would reduce to zero. Of course, the revenue attached to that debt also transfers to the water CCO. And what you get is the net outcome in the second box, which is essentially the net debt headroom created for each individual council within that CCO, which for Rotorua Lakes District Council peaks in 27-28 at 97 million. So broadly speaking, $90 to $100 million in debt headroom generated in the council from the separation of water into a joint CCO. And the last slide I'll share is essentially a comparison between three scenarios. It's quite a complicated slide, I appreciate. I'll try and simplify it as much as possible. You'll see four charts, and on each chart there are three trend lines essentially. The yellow line deals with what's currently in your LTP. The blue line is what a single council-owned CCO would look like, and the purple line is what the Bay of Plenty model looks like from 6 councils working together. The reason we do that is we take the base case as your LTP, we then overlay the LGFA's lending covenants to make that financially sustainable on a standalone basis as a CCO, and then we aggregate all of those standalone CCOs into one overall model. And what you can see is, particularly in the water services operating revenues and average water services bill per connection charts, is an improvement when you move from LTP through to single council CCO or joint CCO, and both the water service operating revenues required and the average water services bill per connection, which is one of the key considerations is affordability of the water charges. And if you can look at that bottom right chart, essentially you see in year 10 the price difference per connection being approximately 2,700 versus just over 2,500. So I'll pause there and open up for any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Jaron. That's been quite substantial information you've managed to cover. We appreciate that. We'll open up for questions now. We've got a question from Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Jaron. First question, under the new arrangements, how does democracy fit in? What if, hypothetically, the new organisation did a poor job of managing water and these wonderful promises that we see here in front of us didn't eventuate? How would the public be able to vote for different people to be running the organisation?
So, I'll talk about the governance and accountability arrangements that are hardwired into the bill, and I'll also talk about areas where you have discretion to overlay your own expectations and the expectations of the communities. So the way the bill essentially prescribes an accountability framework that enshrines you as the shareholding council, and if you're working alongside other councils as the shareholders, to set the expectations for that organisation, and the mechanism to do that is through statement of expectations, and it has quite a high bar to it. The water organisation has to give effect to your expectations. Now, from a democratic perspective, you could seek input from the community to shape that, but you have the ability to set those expectations on behalf of your community, and the water organisation is required to give effect to them. You also have the ability to appoint, replace, remove directors of the organisation as shareholders. You can do that directly as owners, or what we recommend model is something like a shareholder council is established, which will have elected representatives from each of the councils on it, and they would have the ability to monitor the performance of the organisation on a regular basis, as well as make those governance appointments and replacements as required. Obviously, the organisation has to produce regular reporting, and under the bill as introduced, the organisation would have to report on a half-yearly as well as an annual basis on their performance. You have the regulatory regime, which has information disclosure at its core, so you'll be able to publicly see the performance of the organisation across a number of performance dimensions, and also see how that compares with other water providers across the country. And additionally, as part of the as part of the constitution of the organisation, you have the opportunity to hardwire any additional mechanisms that you feel are important to reflecting the community's expectations and requirements in the way the organisation operates. So there's a large degree of prescribed controls, levers and influences, and you also have discretion to build in additional safeguards into the constitution.
So there would be the public would not be able to participate in an election of these people. We could send a letter of expectation.
It's sort of envisaged that the boards are elected. Essentially, they are competency-based board appointments rather than elected members of the board.
Okay, thank you for that. Could you explain how a CCO would have more access to debt funding? Councils have access to debt funding based on their revenue. How does it work for one of these CCOs?
Yeah, so currently councils who borrow through LGFA have a debt to revenue ratio of 280%. That's a good credit rating. It's 1.75 of farm-rated councils. What LGFA have determined is where a water CCO is adopted as a delivery arrangement because of the competency-based directors because of the company form of their organisation, and essentially because of the regulated nature of the organisation, they will lend to that organisation at a higher gearing than they lend to councils today, specifically for water services. At a high level, that's 500% debt to revenue for water services. The actual covenants that LGFA apply are slightly different for water organisations, but at a summary level, it's approximately 500% debt to revenue.
What's the rationale for lending up to 500% of revenue?
The rationale is, I guess, as a financier, they look at the riskiness of the lending, and because a number of the safeguards are built into the form of the organisation, as prescribed in the legislation, and as well as the regulation that has been introduced. The delivery of water services as long as infrastructure is deemed by them as being lower risk, and therefore they're willing to lend at a higher ratio.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll go online. I believe we've got Councillor Kiriopo who has a question.
Yes, please, thank you. I was interested in water care being the exemplar, and I note that only 17 beaches out of 80 in Auckland were open in 2024, with 6 beaches closed permanently, 7 beaches closed until next winter due to the contamination from water care, wastewater and stormwater. And I just wonder how that fits with water care being the exemplar, please.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. It's a good question, and I'm not suggesting that water care is perfect, and there are some good examples of areas that need drastic improvement, and those areas are being addressed through the chart that is being introduced. I guess the examples I shared were more focused on some of those key improvements I've been able to make through operating as a separate water organisation, and the levels of investment that I've been able to increase, particularly over the last 5 years, at an affordable rate to consumers, and will further be enhanced with the financial separation from the council as well. But no, separate points are incredibly valid, and it's not a perfect organisation by any stretch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I am mindful of time, so we'll take one final question from Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much, Jared. I've got a few questions, but again, I'll go as far as the Your Worship will allow for time. Jared, could I ask, is there any requirements by a by a council or under the other 2 CCO models, whether standalone or multi, for hapu and iwi representation?
Answers absolute flexibility. So there's nothing prescribed in that regard. But local water done well is flexible in nature and is designed for councils to have a say in the constitution, the composition of any shareholder councils, for example, that are formed, and to make judgments and considerations for, I guess, what is most appropriate for your community in terms of the representation.
Thank you. So could I ask, if a council chose not to safeguard iwi or hapu input, is there any indemnity from councils? I mean, could an application be filed with the Waitangi Tribunal?
That's probably an area outside my expertise. But essentially, from a policy perspective, what I would emphasise is that the normal considerations under the Local Government Act for the council's engagement, consultation and involvement with the hapu still applies, so nothing under local water done will change those obligations.
Fine, so we have no requirements, no guidelines, but then no indemnity either.
sorry, the light just flipped off again.
Oh, sorry.
Essentially, the local water done well policy doesn't change any of those obligations that exist under the Local Government Act currently.
Okay, fine. And I'll make a final question if it's fine. Your Worship, thank you. Could I ask, the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, and at least two ministers of local government have made comments around councils getting back to the basics. If a huge part of our day-to-day operations, being the free waters, is removed from local government day-to-day management, wouldn't it make sense that at some point the 280% would be reduced? Because if I was in government and I was taking a huge section of operations off council, and on the other hand I was lecturing them on getting back to basics, I'd be lowering that debt level at some point to stop councils just borrowing and borrowing. So to say that it's freeing up more monies for us for, you know, our other key priorities, that's not guaranteed into the future at all, isn't it?
It's a political decision, the government, and or a decision for the board of the Local Government Funding Agency, who are a CCO, which is owned by the councils, who are shareholders in the LGFA. So that, you know, I appreciate the question, Councillor. It's less a government decision and more a risk-based decision that the LGFA would make, and they haven't given any indication that will change in the future.
Thank you. I appreciate we may not have an indication of change, but do we also have a commitment that there will be no change?
I don't have an absolute commitment, but I'm certainly willing and able to talk to the LGFA about that. If it's an unresolved question, I can come back to Andrew with an answer on it.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you very much, Jaron. We really appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We're now going to go to Andy Burgess. He is our General Manager for Infrastructure and Regulation from the Commerce Commission. And just a heads up to our Taumata Arawai team, we expect to come to you in about 20 minutes, but really appreciate your patience. Thank you. So we'll now hand over to Andy. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Morena ki katoa. Do you want me to share my slides? Or have you got them there?
Yes, please, if that's possible.
Oh, you do want me to share the slides?
Yes, please. If it's easier, we can do it, Andy.
It might be. Let me try again.
Oh, thank you, Andy. We can see your screen now.
You can now. Okay, great. So thanks very much for inviting me to speak. So I'm General Manager of Infrastructure Regulation at the Commerce Commission. And infrastructure regulation means electricity lines, gas pipelines, the fibre broadband network run by Chorus and the smaller operators, the three main New Zealand airports, and now water. I've also got my colleague Charlotte Reid, who's our water director, with me. So we're actually quite excited to be regulating water because we know how important it is, but we know there are lots of issues that we need to deal with. If I move to the next slide, I'm hoping that most people have heard of the Commerce Commission. So we are a competition authority. We deal with mergers. We deal with misuse of market power and cartels. We deal with fair trading issues. So you might have heard us on the news looking at concerts and some consumers who can't get their money back from cancelled concerts. We deal with consumer credit and trying to make sure that consumers have the right information to make choices. and we deal with this thing called economic regulation. And I'll come on to what economic regulation is. But we use economic regulation in telecommunications, in the areas I mentioned just now, but also in the bank, retail, payment systems. In groceries, we're trying to improve grocery competition and lower prices for consumers, and in dairy, and most recently in water. And generally, certainly when we're regulating, we're trying to influence behaviour and performance so that consumers get the right quality of service at a decent price. And we're very much focused on the long-term interests of consumers. So we are independent of government. So we're a public body, but we're independent of ministers, so that we can take a long-term view and sort of outside of shorter-term political considerations. And hand in hand with that sort of independence, we believe in being transparent and in consulting with people and communicating with people. And in terms of the outcomes we want to see, our 4 strategic outcomes are stewardship, which is very relevant to water, competitive markets, which is less relevant, but we want the good things from competitive markets to be available wherever we can get them, fair trade, and I guess most relevant, essential services, so that consumers get value and quality from essential services. And we realise that we are not alone in the water landscape. This slide will probably get expanded as we know more and more about the sector. We are working very closely with Taumata Arawai and with colleagues at the Department of Internal Affairs, but we realise that there are regional councils, OAG and others that we need to engage with and who we will engage with in due course. And I think we probably ought to say that at the moment we have a specific role as Crown Monitor for water care. So we're essentially regulating water care in an interim economic regulatory regime before the long-term regime comes in for everyone, and that's currently going through Parliament, as you've heard. And we are getting our head around water care's performance. So I don't think we would describe water care as perfect at all. There are lots of things that we need to dig into and get our heads around, and you'll probably hear more about that in due course. But we will be the longer term regulator, subject to Parliament, of water in New Zealand. And the initial powers that we've got are about information disclosure. So this is a regulatory tool that we use for airports and in the other sectors that I mentioned, particularly electricity. And it's about transparency and shining a light on performance. So the way information disclosure works for us is that we would require anyone operating a water service to make information publicly available on their website. And then in due course, we would do some analysis of that information and play it back publicly. And that could include league tables, comparisons across different areas, highlighting things that we might be concerned about that we might want to dive deeper into. So I think in contrast to Taumata Arawai that you'll hear about in due course, the information goes live after we require it, and then we publish information. It's not just a question of the information coming to us. And in terms of the way the bill's currently written, we are expecting to put in place initial requirements 6 months after the bill is passed. So with that in mind, we have just consulted on our initial thinking on the basic information requirements that should apply to anyone operating water infrastructure service. And that consultation is live until the 26th of March. We'll then weigh up what people have said, and we'll be ready to consult on a draft decision as soon as the bill is passed, so that we can get everything in place within 6 months of the bill passing. And then I think you heard earlier that there are a number of tools within the proposed legislation, so we were very keen to have a sort of flexible toolkit so that we can apply different tools to different circumstances, and one of the key principles being an economic regulator is to be proportionate. So I've just talked about the basic information requirements that would apply to everyone. There are different tiers of regulation which can be switched on, and we're still trying to work through the mechanism, but it probably needs ministerial agreement, but different tools that can be switched on depending on the circumstances. So one of those is information thresholds. So we will be able to set not only a maximum revenue threshold, which is what we're used to doing in other sectors, but also in the case of water, a minimum revenue threshold. This is designed to allow us to say that if we feel that not enough investment is happening in a particular part of the country, we could require a minimum level of investment. This is all to do with long-term stewardship of the assets and making sure that the interests of future consumers are taken into account as well as today's consumers. We will also have the power to monitor and enforce financial ring fence, make sure that money recovered for water infrastructure is spent on water infrastructure and not diverted into other areas. We will be able to set quality regulation and or performance requirements, so we'll be able to mandate particular measures for quality or for performance. So it might be that if we think that certain high-level outputs need to be specified, or certain projects or the outcomes of projects need to be specified, we could do that. And then I guess the heaviest tool we've got, which we will be applying to water care, is price quality regulation, which is where we periodically would review the investment plans and expenditure needs of a water entity, and we would look at efficiency, we'd look at whether those plans stack up, and then we would set a maximum or minimum, possibly both, revenue thresholds in so the maximum amount of money that could be recovered in return for a minimum level of quality that consumers should expect. I mentioned we work with other agencies, and we're very keen to make sure that we don't overburden councils or anyone else running a water infrastructure service. So I think it's important that we, and Taumata Arawa in particular, don't ask for the same information in slightly different forms, and we just impose bureaucracy and cost on people. So we are trying to be as aligned as possible. We've got a strong working relationship which started, I think, with Taumata Arawa's establishment, where our chief executive was on the establishment board. And so we're working very closely with Taumata Arawa, but we realise we also need to work very, very closely with others. And this is a slide just setting out the timelines as we currently understand them. Obviously, it's a question of what the final legislation says, and that's going through Parliament. But we just need to see where things land. And then finally, I just wanted to sort of emphasise a few things about economic regulation. So it's independent of government, and as I said earlier, it's designed to influence behaviour and make sure that the right things happen in the longer term interests of consumers. It is a long-term relationship, so whoever's running the water service, whether it's a council or a CCO or another body, there is a long-term relationship with the regulator. It isn't just a short-term thing, and so there's a kind of interdependency. So the regulator will rely on information coming from the water entity, which means that the quality of information is important. And so we are likely to require director sign-off, which could mean councillor sign-off of any information that we get, because we are dependent on the quality of that information for us to do our job and for us to assess performance. Equally, I think from the perspective of the water entity, there will be times when you don't like what we do, but hopefully there will be times when you do like what we do, and it is a long-term relationship. And so whatever form of entity you have, I think you need people to manage that relationship and interact with us, not only on the provision of information and publication of information, but also understanding where we're coming from and making sure that we understand where you're coming from. But then beyond that, I think it's about long-term stewardship. It's about proper asset management. So really thinking about the long-term strategy and moving to a position where it's clear when the optimal time for investment is. And obviously you can only do that if you have really good information about the condition and location of your assets. It's about making sure that money recovered for water is spent on water. And it's about continuous improvement, and so we will always be pushing more and more improvements, and we'll be doing that transparently and publicly. So I wanted to stop there. Charlotte and I are very happy to answer any questions. I know that there are different levels of knowledge of what economic regulation is. We are very happy to answer questions now, or we're happy to answer questions later. We realise that we need to get out there and explain what economic regulation is and what it's likely to look like.
Thank you very much, Andy. We also appreciate Charlotte joining us online. We do have 5 minutes if there are any questions. We'll take a question from Councillor Lee and then Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is called local water done well. Really, it's regional water done well, isn't it?
It's the government's policy. I think as things stand, there are 67 councils responsible for water. Whether they become regional and whether they're amalgamated is up to the councils. I think that's the government policy. I guess we are, as an independent regulator, we are neutral to the form of the entity. But I guess I'd say that some of the things to think about are about economies of scale in terms of being able to have a regulatory team, being able to have the right focus on asset management at a senior level, having the right resources to carry out the work. But ultimately, it's up to councils whether they amalgamate or not.
Is this legislative change, does it really amount to a lack of confidence by the government in local governments to look after their own water?
Again, I think that's a political question, so it's probably more of the DIA. I'd say, just from our sense, in looking at other sectors and what we know about water so far, seems like that has been generally historic underinvestment across the country. That doesn't mean that each area is underinvested, but generally there are issues with water, and we heard about Wellington Water yesterday. So I think we see the benefit in thinking about the longer term and making sure enough money is spent on water. So we are not politicians, so we're agnostic to whichever government has whichever policy, but we do believe in long-term stewardship and investment in the water infrastructure.
So the ratepayers...
We'll go to, we've got 3 other questions. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much, Andy. Could I just ask, Andy, if we went to, say, a standalone council model, standalone council controlled model or a multi-controlled model, if that entity decided to, say, introduce full-scale across-the-board water metering, would the Commission have an opinion on that straight off? Would it ask, do you envisage asking for reasons behind it? Or would that be more for the Commission down the track to look at whether that was impacting competition or not?
So whether you install water meters or not, I think is up to you. We see that we wouldn't require it, but we see the benefit, because if you have water meters, you know how much water is being lost through leaks, and you can do lots of things that you can't do if you don't have water meters, but it might be more economic in some parts of the country rather than others. So we would be fairly, I guess, on the positive side of neutral in terms of having water meters. Competition would only come in terms of who you choose to install the water meters versus a competitive market, I think. And I guess if you had the kind of entity that was subject to price quality regulation, you might need money allowed within the framework to invest in meters over time. So it might be something that we look at in terms of how much money you should be allowed to recover from consumers over time.
Thank you.
Generally, we think meters are a positive thing.
So, sorry, your comment that it's up to us, forgive me, but my understanding was if it was a standalone organisation, that they would make the decision, not councillors, because they would be a standalone entity.
I'm trying to hedge whether you form a standalone organisation or not. So it's whoever is responsible for water infrastructure, it's up to them.
Forgive me, and finally, for my last question for time, power companies have, say, with contracts or provisions around making sure that they can supply their product. Would we face anything in, perhaps with industrial, if we had, say, an extreme summer event or with climate change on, would we be facing any, do you see us facing any potential clawbacks from, say, industry or anything like that, that may say, well, sorry, you need to be able to provide at all the levels that we need? I appreciate power companies sign contracts and we're not quite at that stage from what I understand, but is that something we should be concerned about?
Not sure, I don't know whether Charlotte.
I think you're talking about the level of service of water supply that you're able to provide to industrial customers. Is
Certainly.
that the question?
Yep, well, not just,
but... Would there be any financial clawback from them?
Certainly. Do we have an indemnity if we can't provide?
No, I don't think there would be an indemnity if you can't provide. But again, at the moment, I think a lot of those contracts are set up between the water organisation and the supplier and the customer, or a level of services set for the community, which any new connections has to sign up to, essentially.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Tamanakata.
Thank you. And question from Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Andy. Just a question around the tools you're proposing to use, specifically the monitoring and enforcement of financial ring fencing. There'll be various different models used, but if an in-house model is used by a council, what sort of level of scrutiny will you talk about not diverting money to other areas, what level of scrutiny will the other areas of the council's finances go under with respect to spending, so that I just wanted some feedback on that, please.
So Charlotte might want to come in on this, and it is an area where we're still talking to government ministries about how it will work, but we will be focused on the water infrastructure money and whether enough money is spent on water infrastructure. I think, are agnostic as to where else it might be going. We'll just be focused on is there enough money going into water infrastructure, and we will set kind of allocation rules, detailed kind of regulatory rules so that people need to comply with those rules. But I don't know whether you want to add anything, Charlotte. I don't know that if I'd say agnostic, Andy. I think, the Commission is required to monitor the ring fence. Our requirement will be we will be required to monitor water and wastewater expenditure ring fencing to start with. And the legislation does provide for us to consider wider matters across council if there are concerns about financial sustainability of that organisation. So if you chose to keep your suppliers in-house, then that's an example of when we could ask for information more widely. In terms of general scrutiny, I think it's developing an understanding of the kinds of cost allocation rules that we would have in place, and if you have detailed activity-based costing already, you might apply such rules yourselves, and we are likely to seek audit or verification of the things that are reported to us. So in terms of scrutiny, that's the independent audit of the information that's provided around the ring fence is likely to be our first point of call. But yeah, it's important to understand that we will be required to monitor and from 2027 enforce that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Sorry, one final question from Councillor Waru.
Thank you, Andy and Charlotte, for the kōrero. Just a quick question, as Councillor O'Brien already asked my question around the monitoring of the water meters. You mentioned that it hasn't passed through Parliament yet, the bill. Do you envisage any great change to what's been proposed that will change what you have to do?
We don't know. You got to be, Charlotte. I think there are some things that we would like to change. They tend to be sort of more detailed things, but we think the fundamental principles will survive. But it really is up to the select committee process. I don't really want to add anything, Charlotte.
No, I think we're all second guessing that one. That's a lovely question.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Andy and Charlotte. We appreciate your time this morning. Ngā mihi.
Thank you, and we are happy to talk at any time. So if you think of further questions as you start to get your head around things, just let us know.
Cool. We'll keep in touch, Andy and Charlotte. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to our team at Taumata Aroai. Thanks once again for your patience. Joining us is the CE Alan Pregnall, and we also have Dr. Sarah McFall, who's Head of System Strategy and Performance, and also Michael Petherick, Senior Policy Advisor. So we'll hand over, and kia ora to Tim Cadigan as well. Lovely to have you joining us too. So I'll hand over to you guys. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mayor. Look, mercifully, we've got a very short slide deck because I thought I'd keep it pretty, keep to the key points for you on the drinking water and just give you a quick overview of the wastewater national standards, which we released earlier this week for consultation. So, look, on drinking water, the priority for us since we got set up about 3 years ago has been on the council-operated drinking water supplies. They service about 85% of the country, and so the focus there is making sure that the water coming out of those supplies, we can assure households and businesses that it's safe to drink. So there has been a bit of a hole in that system, and that's been around the basic treatment and barriers that those water supplies have needed. Most councils were fine, but there's a sizable minority, about nearly 30 councils that had supplies that didn't either have the chlorine or other treatment or the protozoa barrier, as we saw in Queenstown a year or two ago with the Cryptosporidium outbreak. So we've issued a directive to all the council supplies to get those installed if they aren't and operating properly, and councils are largely on track with that. You're fine from the data I have here in that front, but I have bolded the installed and operating, and if I go to the next slide I'll show you why. So each year we issue a drinking water report. There we go. We issue a drinking water report, and this is from last year's one. This just shows part of the country, but effectively all those green bubbles are notifications from water suppliers or laboratories of contamination events, bacterial contamination, E. coli, etc. So despite barriers being in place and treatment being there as well, we're still getting these readings which suggest that those barriers are not necessarily working as they should be. So tidying that up is really our focus. So if you're looking at your service delivery plans, your 10-year plans, if I go to the next slide, I guess my advice is check with your staff that you can be assured that your barriers and treatment are operating. But the other area is the bit under the ground. So your reticulated networks across the country make up about 80% of the asset, and that's actually where the money is in terms of water charges and renewals and issues. So we know that in Wellington, when they fail, you get a wonderful geyser performance playing out. And the problem is that if your pipes are leaking water out, they can also let those pathogens in, which is why you need that residual treatment in the network. So again, my advice to you is to ask your, seek assurance really about what you know about the condition of your network, you know, how much of the network is graded unknown condition, because that is a worry if it is. Have you funded depreciation against that network, and are your renewals keeping up more or less with that depreciation? Because we know when those two get well out of sync, as has happened in Wellington, you get to a critical failure point where you're throwing good money after bad in trying to fix the leaks rather than replace the network. So high level picture, you appear to be good from our data in terms of your drinking water supplies. I think you should check and get some assurance around the condition of your network on the drinking water side. Now, I'll just introduce Dr. McFall, who is, she's headed up our work along with Michael on the wastewater standards. I just thought we could talk very quickly about the process and when are those going to take effect and how do they work vis-a-vis your regional council and the consenting process, and then also just a bit about the content and the standards themselves.
Thanks, Alan. Morena koutou. As I'm sure many of you are aware, and as Jaron talked about earlier, we're currently consulting on 4 draft wastewater standards. These will be New Zealand's first national wastewater standards. They're quite a common feature overseas, but not something that is currently in place in New Zealand. Here you've got a timeline of now until hopefully they're implemented and in place. It's taken quite a process to get to where we are now. We've had a lot of input from regional councils, territorial authorities. We've engaged with a number of technical experts. We've done case studies with iwi and hapu, and we've used our Māori advisory group as well as our board and engaged as broadly as we can to get to our draft standards. We're consulting for the next 8 weeks. We're really keen to engage with as many people as we can, and we've already kicked off a number of webinars, and we're seeing very good engagement and lots of great questions. From there, we'll take everything that comes through the engagement and the formal consultation and provide that back to ministers, who ultimately will be making the decision on the final standards. Although I have to say that's one of the things that is part of the bill currently before Parliament. So pending all of those decisions going through and the bill being enacted around about the middle of the year, we are hoping for the standards to be in place from about August. And one of the pieces of work that will be really important for our work with regional councils and territorial authorities will be the implementation of the standards. There's going to be a lot of guidance that we will need to do. We all need to work really closely with network operators and regional councils to make sure that these are really effective and doing what we want them to do. If we go to the next slide, so you may well be aware that we're consulting on 4 draft standards. So that's discharge to water, discharge to land, biosolids and overflows and bypasses. This is an image that seems to be pretty popular, which explains our approach to the discharge to water standard. And what it shows is that the level of treatment required will depend on the sensitivity of the receiving environment. So going from open ocean, where you can see that the treatment levels there are fewer expectations, right through to lakes, where the standards will need to be a lot higher. And then right off the end of the wheel, you'll see that we cover pristine environments with very low dilution. And in those cases, we're looking at an exceptions regime, which would mean that the normal consenting process would apply in those limited cases where the water is pristine or there are other very specific requirements. So we're really interested to engage. We'd be very happy to have a special session. We've got a number of webinars. There's a lot of material on our website with some of the information. For instance, Jaron talked about the case studies we did, and those are really important for trying to work out what does this actually mean for people's investment, what are the potential cost efficiencies. And if you've looked at any of those, you'll see that one of the case studies we looked at was showing potential savings of about 40% of consenting costs. So there's some really useful information in that. And really happy to take questions. And we've got Michael here, who's a bit of a technical expert on these.
So just to square off it's a game changer really for how you consent your discharges from your treatment plant. So it effectively replaces much of the existing process when you seek a consent renewal. If you lodge an application for consent and you choose the appropriate standard that applies to the decision that you've made to discharge either to land or to water. If you meet the standard with that application, the regional council must accept the consent, and it's proposed to be a 35-year consent duration. The choice of where you discharge to remains a local conversation at the front end. So that's still a conversation you have with your community, hapu, iwi, and then once you, the benefit, I guess, of the standards is that you can provide some indicative costs when you do engage with your community and consult with your community about whether you want to discharge to water or land. You'll actually have some numbers to do that against, so it's not there.
Thank you very much. We'll open up for questions. We've got first question from Councillor Brown and then Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just wondering where plastics and microplastics might fit into these standards. Is that being considered, and where does it fit?
Yeah, so those are good examples of contaminants of emerging concern. So you don't, looking across all the wastewater treatment plants in the country, you don't see treatment limits imposed for those contaminants. It's an area that we will just continue to review over time, keep an eye on what's happening internationally and locally. Drinking water, and if it's necessary for standards to be implemented in those areas, then we'd kind of stand up a work program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Director General of Health has directed us to put hydrofluorosilicic acid into our water supplies. Have you given any thought to what this does to copper pipes and other pipes, whatever the pipes are actually made of?
Yeah, so the fluoridation direction, as you know, comes from the DG of Health. We already, in the drinking water standards, we've long had a maximum value, if you like, that, too much fluoride in the water poses a public health risk, so we monitor that maximum value. But if the effect on the network is not something that the standards address, I guess. If you've got, the issue pops up sometimes, Councillor, with chlorine as well. Christchurch, for example, which didn't used to chlorinate for quite some time, now does chlorinate its networks, and because they've got about 150 water supplies in the city there, they're quite short reticulated networks, so there were some issues initially around dosing there and the effect that they have had on the pipes and also hot water cylinders. Disputed, I think, at this stage.
Thank you. I'll carry on and I can come back to you if you've got another question. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Tamana. Could I just ask on the last statement there made by our Zoom visitors, could I ask, would under a CCO model or a multi-CCO model, who would be responsible for resource consent obligations and maintenance? Would that be the CCO or councils as the ultimate shareholder?
My understanding, and I put a slight asterisk that I'm the water quality regulator and not necessarily in the detail of the CCOs, but as the network operator, it's their responsibility, the CCO, to seek the consent for their discharges. The council will have a legitimate public interest in where those discharges discharge to, and you may well choose to be part to lead consultation around where the discharge goes to. So that area, I suspect, in practice, is going to be a combination of the CCO and the council because of the public nature of the interest.
Thank you. So forgive me, it's a little confusing as someone not involved in this area that much. When you say in consultation, so if we go out to the public for a discharge and they say option A, yet the CCO says, sorry, that's going to cost far too much, we're going to factor in option B, is our preference. We're obviously the single shareholder, but they're tasked with running the operations. And, you know, when we've heard about there'll be safeguarding on, you know, the amount of money being spent and making sure that the income is spent appropriately, who will finally make those decisions? Council as the shareholder or the CCO?
So the CCO, as the network operator, has to seek the consent and, you know, and have that information in it. What I'm suggesting is that as the single shareholder of that CCO, you have the tools, for example, your statement of expectations of the board and the organisation, you would signal your interest in that discharge and your desire to lead that consultation. So in effect, the council can lead out through your ownership tools on the consultation if you want to do so, because you own the entity. The entity itself would be the administrator, if you like. It's going to seek the consent, but if you want to lead that as a shareholder, you can do that. That's your statement of expectations and ownership interest in terms of the board. If they didn't, they proceeded to do something against your practices, you have options in terms of effectively the hiring and firing of the governance of the entity.
Forgive me, that sounds a little bit, because if we say, if I could give you an option regarding a discharge option, if we factored in option A, which let's say costs significantly more than other options, and the CCO board come back to us and say, we suggest perhaps options B and C because of cost analysis, cost-benefit analysis, but we factor in an environmental conservation factor as councillors. We can make the final determination now, you're saying, but that sort of runs against what we've heard about the board being in charge of debt financing, raising the debt, etc.
Yeah. So I mean, the scenario you're positing is where there is a strong difference of opinion between the CCO and the council on which consent approach do we want to take. And in that situation, the CCO as the operator is the one that has to get the consent, and so they may well, against your wishes, decide to go for option B. In that instance, in practice, I'd expect you to have a conversation with the CCO about two options, right? And in 99% of the circumstances, you'll find an agreed way through. If you don't, that's where your authority to hire and fire a board is effectively your tool if you don't like the decisions the entity is making.
Thank you very much for your answers.
And,
thank you.
You know, that's the model, councillor. There is autonomy there for the CCO, and if you don't like it, you have some options.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll go online to Councillor Kiriopa.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, please. The first is, I note your differing discharge rules based on receiving waters, and I just wonder how much is being taken into account in the setting of those rules. Because, for example, here in Rotorua, everything that is consented in Rotorua Lakes and rivers will eventually end up at Makitu and Little Waihi. And so how is that being taken into account in terms of the oceans ending up being, getting everything?
Yes, so the proposals for the treatment limits, they went through a pretty comprehensive process with our technical review group. So both having people from territorial authorities who are experienced with wastewater discharges, regional councillors, obviously our board, and Te Puna, our Māori advisory group, and also some of the leading experts from consultancies. So we looked both, here in New Zealand, what you expect to see in consents, and overseas. So what I would say about the discharges to lakes or freshwater, so they are more sensitive environments, so the treatment requirements are significantly higher for those environments so that they are protective of both the environment and public health. By the time those discharges get to the ocean, because they are a higher quality of discharge, the ocean actually has a really high assimilative capacity to deal with pollution from a whole range of sources. So it's the least sensitive environments in terms of its ability to handle pollution from a range of sources. The treatment limits are protective of the environment and public health. That's the proposals there. They're protective of the environment and public health. So they are what you would expect to see for wastewater treatment plants that are being consented now.
The tricky part, Councillor, if we have to get the balance between cost and quality right on the standards. If we don't, we're going to see a continuation of what we've got now, which is a building backlog of expired consents across the country. It's already into the 20-something%. It'll be over 60% over the next decade, and we're not building the new infrastructure or doing the upgrades because it's deemed unaffordable under the current consenting process. So this will strip time and cost out, and I guess the feedback that we're looking for on the standards is have we got the trade-off between the two right?
Thank you. And my second question is, given we're talking about how well the oceans deal with what we're pumping into all of our rivers and lakes. Given we've all seen, I'm sure, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, ocean acidification that the world has seen. My question is, are our fisheries around the country being engaged appropriately in your rule setting processes to consider the cost to them of that industry?
So at the moment, what we see, right across the country, is a system for treatment of wastewater that is not transparent. There is not good quality regulation of limits. Usually treatment plants are breaching their consents and communities don't know about that. So what we are looking at doing through these proposals essentially is lifting the quality of the outcomes and the performance of wastewater plants and networks. So we would expect to see better outcomes for the ocean as a result of proposals, not worse ones.
Well, and just a supplementary question, if that's right, please. So, as part of your processes, are you looking at the cumulative impacts of catchments, which just sort of goes back to my first question?
Yeah, so the starting point really for our technical review group was when they looked at the environments that wastewater treatment plants are discharging to and networks overflowing to. 75% of those water bodies are already polluted. So the starting point was working towards a set of treatment limits that would help those plants to do their bits and lift their weight in improving water quality. And that's what you see through the consenting process by and large as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got a question from Councillor Patterson, Waru, and then we'll finish with Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much for your rather in-depth explanation. I do have a couple of questions based on your slide presentation. And regarding your responsibility as an organisation, as an entity, is Taumata Arawai responsible for enforcing drinking water safety standards outside of bacterial exceedances?
Yeah, so our job, probably the easiest way to think about it with all these agencies feeding in and having a part of the system oversight, if you like, our job is to focus on what comes out of the end of the pipe. So the drinking water that you rely on to drink, and then the discharges that come from the wastewater and system in terms of the standards. So yes, chemical contamination, so where there is a nitrates or lead or other exceedants, we get a notification from either the water supply, but certainly the laboratory of those. They tend to be supply-specific risks, whereas E. coli and other bacterial or protozoal risks are right up and down the country. That's the map I showed you. We know that it's everywhere, so you've got to have protections against those. But the chemical and other source water risks tend to be a function of either land use plant functions around the water catchment or specific characteristics of the water supply.
Thank you. So I look at the graph you've got here. You talk about the lake, you talk about rivers and streams, and you just mentioned before in your corridor that they are very sensitive areas. So the same water that I put in my mouth, also I wash my car with, and ends up getting into our stormwater system, which ends up getting into the lake and our streams, etc., and then heads to the ocean, as Councillor Kiriopa mentioned. Now, do you consider, for example, that things that we have bioaccumulative components that are materially toxic to people and the environment, for example, arsenic, cadmium, mercury, lead and fluoride? Would you be monitoring those levels?
Yeah, we have in the drinking water standards, so the New Zealand drinking water standards are pretty similar to the drinking water standards in most parts of the world. They're based on World Health Organization standards and I guess adjusted for any particular characteristics that your country's water supplies may have. So there are maximum values allowed and your staff are required to take samples of the drinking water at regular intervals. The laboratory processes them, and if there's an exceedance against any of those that you mentioned, we get notified and then we respond accordingly. So we had a spike in arsenic in the water supply of both Auckland and the Waikato councils recently. Arsenic's actually naturally prevalent in the Waikato River and catchment, but it had spiked above normal levels. We got notified. That's actually only an issue if you get exposed to heightened levels of arsenic over quite some duration of time. So that has now been addressed. And it's just an example, I guess, of how the system works and when we get notified what we do.
Thank you for clarifying that. Just one last question, Your Worship. So your standards are based on research which is developed from countries all across the world, no doubt, and is updated regularly. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, some elements change. I mean, your fellow councillor mentioned microplastics as an issue, and we know that we've got, potentially PFAS and some other emerging threats and risks to water supply that probably weren't on the horizon. Protozoa. So when Queenstown had its cryptosporidium outbreak a couple of years ago, 30 years ago, people probably didn't worry about protozoa. It wasn't a thing. It wasn't a known risk to water supplies. And come the 90s, we knew actually it was a risk. So they do get updated, but I wouldn't say they constantly changing. I think they're probably fairly static. Nitrates around intensive dairy use is an area that people are keeping an eye on, emerging research there. The public water supplies at the moment seem to be okay. Some of the private bores are showing, some concerning readings in parts of the country.
Right. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Councillor Waru.
Tēnā koe te manukura. A few of my questions have already been answered, so that's good. Just one question, thank you. Kia koutou taumata arawai. Emi atu ana kia koutou. I just want to ask around what is local government and then there's regional. The standards we are talking about, how are they applied also to the regional council?
So they effectively, our job in drinking water is a bit different than our job in wastewater, if you like. So in drinking water, we are effectively the oversight authority on behalf of households, consumers, whoever's drinking the water. We do the whole lot. In wastewater, what we've done with the standards or the proposed standards is replaced the work that a regional council would normally do in considering your consent application. The standards will replace most of that. But the regional council remains the organisation responsible for monitoring your compliance with the consent and for taking enforcement action if it's required for breaches of the consent. So they're still the implementation arm and they're still the monitoring arm. Probably my view personally, it's been very uneven regulation and enforcement of those discharge standards historically, but there will be a much smaller set of conditions attached. There'll be key conditions attached to the consents going forward, and they'll be the same up and down the country. So you might start to see some actual monitoring and enforcement activity from the regional councils, because if they're doing it in one part of the country, why aren't you doing it somewhere else?
Yeah, and we'll have an oversight across all of the regional councils and be able to provide national level data for the first time, which hopefully will shine a light on performance.
Okay, thank you. Yep, that answers my question. I'm here.
Thank you, and we'll just go back to Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned before the hot water cylinder controversy. This is of some interest to me. I've just replaced a hot water cylinder here in Rotorua, which is 55 years old. I've been approached by a constituent who owns something like 20 to 30 rental properties in the Hastings area, and this lady tells me that they're replacing hot water cylinders every few years. Is this what you were alluding to?
Yeah. Yeah, so the two areas that I'm aware of that appear to have an unexplained spike in hot water cylinders getting pitting and needing replacing were in the Christchurch area and the Hastings area, because Havelock North, that kind of set the ball rolling around all these water reforms. 8,000 people sick, 3 to 4 people died. That was for want of chlorine. So there wasn't treatment in that water supply. Chlorine was in that water supply. The bacteria wouldn't have harmed them. They now do chlorinate, and so there are reports of a spike in the hot water cylinders needing to be replaced. Master Plumbers has been on the case a bit, but it's quite disputed, Councillor, as to whether it's a causal connection to the chlorine. I'm not in a position to answer either way.
I might be able to help. When I was mayor of Central Otago, we had really bad water quality in terms of lime or calcium carbonate in the Alexandra supply. We shifted the bore away, and several electricians actually retired because there was no money in it for them anymore. And that's an aesthetic quality, the lime in the water, not a technical thing that we look at. It's not one of the ones we monitor. So there can be a range of reasons for that problem occurring.
Okay, some of the areas, some of the districts around New Zealand have particularly bad water supplies. I'm thinking Wellington. Is there any research being done as to, is it a coincidence, for example, that they fluoridate, and maybe some of the other districts as well?
Well, actually, our water supply is fantastic. It falls on a mountain range in large amounts. And so we have plenty of it. The problem is the pipe network, which has kind of passed the tipping point, if you like, of maintenance renewals. But there are, I guess, there is local chatter about the effect that the Kaikoura and Canterbury earthquakes had on that network. Wellington did get a couple of decent shakes on it, and has that caused breakages in the network? Don't know. I don't think there's any discussion around whether fluoridation, which has been in the Wellington water supply for a long, long time, is an issue.
Okay, one of our water supplies is spring water. It comes out of the ground, it's inside a building, and there's absolutely no possibility of contamination as we had in Hastings from a flock of sheep that are near the well where they draw the water from. Is there any ability to reduce the water treatment requirements for a pure water supply such as ours?
So there are provisions in our current legislation where you can apply for an exemption from those treatment requirements. There is also a proposal in the legislation currently in front of the Select Committee, the Bill 3, if you like, for local water done well, that proposes to broaden that out so that suppliers can apply to be exempt from any individual aspect of the regulation, if you like, and we can proactively do that. So there are water supplies, community water supplies that people don't want the treatment in, and we just evaluate those on the risks of each single supply. So without knowing the details of the supply, I can't answer it, but there is an avenue there.
Okay, I just have one further question, if I may.
Just briefly, please, and then we'll
Yes.
take one final question from Councillor Pedersen.
So I'm not sure if this is your question or an earlier speaker's question, but early in this term, this council made a decision to extend our water services by about 1 kilometre. For my colleagues, I'm referring to the Pekka block. I'm wondering how the new arrangements, our council has put together a future development strategy, a long-term plan, so we have an idea about how the city should develop. How would our plans to extend the city in the direction that we think is best be affected by the new arrangements? Like, would a water entity, for example, refuse to implement that extension to the water system, potentially?
Yeah, look, I'm probably not in a position to respond to that question. That's really about who makes decision planning and growth-based decisions between the CCO and the council. So I'll defer that. Probably it's a DIA question, to be honest, Council.
No, that's okay. Thank you. And we'll take one final question from Councillor Pedersen.
Thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair. Just a clarification, if I can, please. I was very lucky to have a visit of our Karamutaki in the spring recently, and I saw the treatment plant. So in the treatment plant, we have UV treatment and we have chlorine treatment. So I understand that is treatment of water. Can you tell me if fluoridation is treatment of water?
No, so fluoridation isn't required for the safety of the drinking water. So with chlorine, which often gets intertwined, if you like, with fluoride, but chlorine is what we require as either treatment, either that or UV, and then in the pipes, residual treatment in the pipes, because we know that bugs can get in after the treatment plant. Fluoride is a public health measure for teeth, if you like, and it's administered in parts of the country through the water network because that's considered a practical means of getting the fluoride to the population. There's nothing to do with drinking water safety. The only issue for fluoride in drinking water safety is you can't have too much of it in the water supply or it's dangerous. Right, so that's what we monitor for.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is that Stavros in the background?
Yes.
Hey, Stav.
Look, thank you very much. I appreciate we have kept you well over the time that we had suggested to you, so thank you very much for your patience. It's been really valuable for our council to be able to ask these questions of you and hear your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, councillors, we'll now take a brief break for 10 minutes and then we'll return and have a presentation from our staff. Thank you. Katoa, welcome back. We are going to continue with our Local Waters Done Well workshop, and we'll now hand over to our Rotorua Lakes Council staff. We've got Stavros and also Russell, who will take us through this presentation. Just a reminder, this is being live streamed, and also at the end of this we would like some feedback from councillors on the preferred option. Thank you very much, Stavros.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Morena Tatu Katoa. Russell, next to me, has worked more intensely in constructing this presentation to you today. And between us, we will respond to any questions that may come out of, after the presentation. Madam Chair, before I start the presentation, and cognizant of the length of time you spent with government agencies earlier, I will try to go to most of the more pertinent matters on our presentation. The key issue here is that we will be going soon to consult with our communities about the potential options for a model to follow in the delivery of our water services. And a lot of effort has been put into creating financial models and metrics to provide some guidance as to the options and the validity of those options. I just wanted to preface everything I'm going to say here with a couple of comments. Is that behind all the metrics and all the graphs and all the ratios and all the financial components, there are a number of intangible things that only you as elected members on behalf of the community can apply strategic judgment at some point in time. And some of these intangibles perhaps relate to the relationship this council and any council wants to have with the sitting governments. Governments have general policy statements, and in general we want to collaborate with governments to create regional deals, local deals, and general economic and well-being growth. So the strategic judgment will be required at some point in time to say how is that factor in your decision making. Also, a strategic judgment needs to be made not in the short term but the long term in terms of a potential participation in the larger regional entity, or where we're not competing for scarce resources in managing our three water services, but in actual terms we work with that environment to make sure that our local needs take the appropriate priority. The other judgment that you have to make is that the organization at the moment delivers a range of services. If you do remove some of the services, like the three waters on the council's stewardship and direct responsibility, you need to give due consideration to the effect of the remaining scale of the council, its critical mass and its critical ability to continue to operate at the scale it is and to represent the community at the appropriate level. And obviously, there are areas like, and I think Councillor O'Brien asked some questions to that effect, of how to interface with the community to decide strategic priorities and making sure the community got trust and confidence in the organization that their strategic priorities remain at your uppermost mind. So I just wanted to preface that, so to say that it's not always easy to put metrics behind these considerations. It requires assessment and judgment and prudence and wisdom. And obviously these are considerations that hopefully you get feedback from the community, and in due time you'll make your wise direction you wish to take. In terms of the model itself, I wanted to also apply that note that in constructing the various financial models and metrics to compare the three options under consideration, an in-house delivery, a CCO fully owned by this council, or a CCO with multi other councils as shareholders, We have made some adjustments to our, the metrics extracted, were from our long-term plan. Our long-term plan is almost 2 years, old at the moment. So we've made certain adjustments to be reflected in the modeling. For example, we have made adjustments, which reflects that progressively over the next, 2-3 years, our depreciation will increase to be fully funded by 2028. The modeling also made adjustments that the depreciation forecasts have been amended to reflect the latest asset valuations. We've got in these 3 water areas somewhere in the region of $1.2 billion of replacement value of assets, and they get adjusted as the revaluation goes forward. The OPEX and OPEX allowance have made for additional regulatory compliance. We heard the regulator that we need to monitor more strictly, regulations and drinking water standards and discharge standards. So our model reflects regulatory allowances for that. Also, we've made allowances in the model to reflect that Taumata ROI and the Commerce Commission will be funded by a specific levy charged to the rates. So those people you spoke to earlier, they will be funded through a targeted levy or a portion of rates to be charged. And in this council, it will be about $400,000. It's going forward on an annual basis. We also have made an additional allowance to reflect the emergence of climate change. As you know, in the last few years, we had weather and climatic events that impacted our stormwater cleanups for stormwater systems and so on. So we have adjusted our LTP to reflect that. And also we have made some adjustments to improve our laboratory quality assurance, because in order to comply with regulations and to demonstrate comply with regulations, our ability to sample and test waters is quite important, and our laboratories is a significant instrument in allowing us to do so. We also made an allowance after 2031, where our current wastewater services contract with Trinity is locked in for the next 10 years, and that gives us an advantage is that we don't actually have to fund the full renewals directly about depreciation, because the contract gives a shield, but that contract will come to an end by 2031, and also the model has made allowance to increase the renewals going forward in the future, if a new contract will be signed, or we cannot negotiate another contract with the same kind of risk reduction as we have it at this point in time. So going forward from here, we'll just go through, and I will try not to elaborate. Can we move that down? Okay. I'll give the, I'll come up here, time to go through that.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. Again, I will go, briefly through it. Obviously, this is, the purpose of this is to update you on key and pertinent points for which will lead you into formulating a consultation document, for the community. The background, I think, is well understood. There's legislation that's been repealed from the previous government. The new government enacted some new regulations and legislation, and obviously we are now required to assess those elements of the regulations and make decisions together with the community in compliance with those, all those issues. Again, this is a very brief summary of the structure of the repealing of regulations and the introduction of new regulations that came into effect as late as December last year. Now, the services delivery plan under the local government and water services arrangements 2024. Councils have to prepare a water services delivery plan that identifies the current state of water services. It demonstrates publicly its commitment to deliver water services in a way that ensures that it will meet all relevant regulatory quality standards for its water services. It is financially sustainable for the territorial authority and supports its housing growth aspirations, urban development, and as specified in the long-term strategies. Consultation, Again, the consultation really must reflect what the Act requires, and we have to require on the options we want to follow. We're not required to consult on the delivery plan itself. The Act provides that Council must identify at a minimum 2 options for delivering water services, and those options would be either continue to remain in-house, delivering the services, or establishing, or joining, or amending, as the case might be, a water services council control organization, or a joint other local government arrangement. Now, elected members, in September last year, the Infrastructure and Environment Committee agreed to direct us as officers to start creating a draft water services delivery plan, which needs to be finalized by the 2nd of September this year, on the basis of an in-house model, while options to explore other arrangements enabled by the legislation remain open and explored.
Can I just add there, Stavros, to the chair? So that decision in September indicated a starting point and a default position. In that time, the way we have been approaching that is Stavros, Russell and team have been focused internally on what the delivery model, what the current delivery arrangements, and not the delivery model itself, but the currently delivery arrangements might look like going forward, and they've fleshed those out. As director at that meeting, I've continued to work with the other councils in the region, so that includes the councils in the Bay of Plenty, but others as well, and trying to bring some alternative options, fleshing out some alternative options, which in September, obviously, there wasn't much information on. So I think as we go through this presentation, I'd invite you to think about what the difference is between a currently financially sustainable model and how that might change over the 10 years of the plan. Because there might be opportunities that we'll talk about where the preferred model might tip from one into the other, and our plan can include that indication of a transition over the 10-year period. So I might just leave it there and chip in with additional comments. But if you see those sort of different, they're not mixed messages, they're messages that reflect that over time the situation might change. And that's what we're trying to communicate. So I'll let Stavros continue.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Just to progress with that, obviously, the 3 models who have worked on to present for public consultation reflect an in-house delivery division, a fully council-owned CCO, or a multi-council owned council and shareholder control CCO. Again, the brief overview of those options. They've got described the ownership, the governance arrangements, and impacts on those of these arrangements onto the strategy of the council. And obviously, in an in-house model, the council has got full control in developing a strategy, monitoring the performance of that strategy, and delivery of the work programs associated with the strategy, but also carries the full liability of both funding, financing, and complying with those kind of regulations. That will always going to have a flow-on impact onto other council activities. A council-owned water organization is, again, is self-evident, is fully council-owned. There is governance and shareholder provisions through the statement of intent and statement of issuing of statement of expectations to the CCO. And obviously, the water organization board prepares a water services strategy, and then that should be consulted with the council in order to make sure that that strategy aligns with the council's wider framework of strategies. And of course, the third option is a multi-council own organization, comprising a number of TLAs in the region, for example. And again, the arrangement is very similar to option 2, obviously, but of course, when you have multiple shareholders into that, there is going to be a significant degree of complexity in issuing a statement of expectations and a statement of intent by those, by that CCO, to make sure it aligns with all of the council's shareholders' expectations. Again, there are degrees of accountability, and of course degrees of, and that accountability changes, as the separation from its decision making, is increasing. The distance between the direct accountability changes, and obviously an in-house unit has got a more direct accountability. The units got more direct accountability to elected members got more direct accountability to the wider community for the decision making. A CCO or either side can be controlled through the appointment of directors, and obviously there are intervention thresholds. Elected members can step in and modify the performance of those CCOs. In terms of borrowings, again, there are significant advantages and disadvantages, I suppose. Depends how you see it. In terms of the models, an in-house unit's borrowing capacity is limited by the wider or the whole of the council ability to leverage debt. And of course, the whole of the council's ability to leverage debt, it depends on these prudential borrowing limits, and obviously limited by the council's desire to maintain affordable core services charges to the community. Under the CCO models, there is a significant opportunity to leverage more debt in order to finance future investment programs by those CCOs compared to an in-house unit, but also the ability for those larger borrowings to be longer term, and as far as I understand it, probably to benefit in terms of the scale of the interest rate and financing costs from those kind of areas. So one of the areas where the new legislation encourages or incentivizes councils to consider setting CCOs, because it provides the ability to decouple the services from the parent organization and gives them more leverage to use long-term financing to enable them to reduce, to keep the costs to the users, to the customers, as low as possible. The advantages of each option is that, again, in an in-house unit, fully have direct oversight and operational control, and also fully direct responsibility. Option 2, in the CCOs, have increased access, to borrowing levels, and the council's control becomes more and more indirect. The bigger the unit, it's and how many areas it represents. Disadvantages, obviously, with an in-house unit, the debt leverage is constrained by the council's own borrowing limits. In option 2, a direct CCO by the council or a multi-council CCO, it may not achieve in a CCO owned by the council exclusively. You might not achieve the benefits of scale because you're still serving the same scale of the community. A high debt derived by the CCO will have an impact on the council's overall capacity to guarantee debt. And obviously the disadvantages of a multi-council CCO is got less direct control. You have a dislocation or distance or separation between the local issues and key priorities. There's a potential disconnection for local communities' wishes, and obviously the potential for a local development take priority over a regional development will be more contested than a council-owned CCO. Now, the outcome of financial modelling, I will let Russell to walk us through that at the moment.
Sorry. You don't want to wait till the end?
Sorry, I just wondered, given that this is one of the most important parts of the consultation and just the need for understanding, I'm just wondering, is it possible just to take questions just around this part of the presentation before we move on to the financial modelling? Given that Stavros has covered quite a lot of information just around the various options.
Yeah, happy.
Just want to know, are there any questions?
So I was just going back to, so the very first slide was that we do need to go out to public consultation with the two options. And so that's a question which just came out of Andrew's comment. What degree of specificity do we need to give to the public around, okay, if it's remaining in-house or it's an in-house CCO, that's fine. But if we're looking at any of the other options, and whether it's a timing thing, like we stay with in-house for, say, 4 or 5 years, and then we move to a multi-council or a different model, what's the level of detail that we need to provide for the public during this consultation period to enable us to then decide on the appropriate delivery mechanism that we have to get sign-off from the government?
I think, and Andrew probably can elaborate a bit onto that, it is my understanding that in consulting with our communities about a preferred model, it should not be seen as a setting perpetuity decision. We could easily consult that each option may have a transitionary phase, which can say by such a date we'll follow that model. But we'll explore, other opportunities and possibilities, through that period and make further decisions, in subsequent phases. We may want to articulate that, for example, you may want to set a timeline where it's desirable for the assets to be transferred to, let's say, a CCO entity by a certain given time. But that at a future stage, that CCO might be part of a wider, a regional, a multi-council CCO. So the idea is to get from the community, in my opinion, views about the merits and the risks and the issues for each of these options, but also to provide some direction that decisions making here and today, it should not constrain the council's ability to make more important and strategic decisions in the future. So that's my view, but Andrew might want to have a different sort of elaborate onto that.
Yeah, thank you, Stavros, and through you, Your Worship. I think it's useful to work backwards from what we need to deliver to the Minister. So we need to deliver to the Minister a plan that we have effectively consulted the public on the essence of. So they're very clear that we don't need to consult on the plan. So we don't have to publish the full plan for consultation. So the essence of the plan needs to include some key financial data that goes with it. So whether the costs and the OPEX that is foreseen by the customers over the 10-year period, and the models by which we might deliver those costs. So, for example, the implications on debt, and that's why some of those charts that you saw from the DIA are the key, are indicating to us what the features of the financial data that we need to disclose to the public are. So, for example, one option might be to say, for the 10 years, Council's going to plan to keep all of its water services delivery in-house, and this is the debt profile, this is the cost profile to 2 years as based on what we know, and these are the risks. Alternatively, Council might say that on day one, we're going to start like this, but at some point, and I would suggest that the points are aligned with long-term plan years, because otherwise it's quite complicated to make drastic changes. So it might be by the 27 long-term plan that Waters is no longer on the Council's balance sheet, but we're not narrowing down our options as to how that happens. So that would be with the CCO, but it might be a single Council CCO or a multi-Council CCO. All those options can be captured in, firstly, in the consultation with the public, and then ultimately in the decision that you made that you make following consultation and before it's submitted to the Minister. So to answer, to provide a summary of my question, it's some financial metrics, but also some indication of how we intend to deliver those financial metrics to the public.
So then just another question then, if we go out with an option of a multi-council owned CCO, how do we get those iterations of what the different, I'm not talking particular councils here, but how do you put together, what councils work together, given that each of the other councils is going out with their own iterations. So we're going to have this big mass of different options that may not align or may align, but we don't know that. So how do we get the, I suppose, confidence for the community that if they come back with the preferred option, that it actually is going to be workable, given that we're still waiting for other councils to make their own decisions?
Thank you, Councillor Kaifong, and through you, Madam Chair. This is exactly the problem that all the staff, the CEs and the mayors have been grappling with. From the CE's perspective, what we have done with the councils that we're discussing these multi-council CCOs with through the Mayoral Forum is we've agreed on some key design principles of a multi-council CCO, and those should all look the same throughout the Bay of Plenty when councillors, when councils speak about a multi-council CCO. So that's the description of the model. The financial implications are going to be different, and what we can talk about, I think we'll get to it later today, is as the DIA presenter earlier shared, DIA have done some modelling on all 6 councils in the Bay of Plenty. There are also options for sub-regional variants of that model, and there's an understanding that because different councils might be modelling different combinations, there's going to be a range of financial outcomes for consumers that we will communicate through the Water Services Delivery Plan consultation phase. What's important is that the numbers might be different, but the descriptions will be the same. So different consumers will experience different financial impacts, and as DIA mentioned, there's no requirement to do price harmonisation through this collaboration. So if there is a multi-council CCO, part of the expectation from the shareholding councils is that there won't be price harmonisation for a period of time, and then maybe that gets revisited by future councils years down the track. So narrative should be consistent. We've worked really hard to make sure that the description, the rules of the road, how a multi-council CCO would operate will be consistent. The numbers that each community faces will not be consistent. They will be different.
Just one final question. Just given all the information we've had presented this morning, which is actually quite detailed and still lots of different government oversights from different departments, if we've got the sort of advantages and disadvantages, could we perhaps add in some of the things that we've heard this morning around consultation models, the price harmonisation, some of the other bits of legislation that are still being worked through by the different departments as to how they then work together? I think they were talking about things like economies of scale, the workforce, all of those sorts of things, which I don't see in the I know. So just a comment.
No, thank you, Councillor Kaifong. We will take that on board. Some of those we haven't turned up here because we might have a slightly different view from government that there necessarily is economies of scale. So we could talk about that. There are examples where the economies of scale work because of the inherent connectivity of the network. We don't have that in this case with any of the other potential Bay of Plenty councils, and so we've taken that out of our analysis so that it doesn't hinge on the efficiencies itself. But absolutely, we need to address those in the narrative. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. And just a point of clarity, if I can, regarding the documents that we were supplied in Stella. So the Mural Forum from the 12th of December, does that have any relevance to this?
Yes, I need to refresh my memory on what is in the documents in Stella, but
I'll elaborate then. It talks about, you just mentioned the conversations between the mayors and the CEOs regarding the potential for a multi-council owned entity. So on page 13 of that document, it talked about components part share allocation, and under the heading of regional standards for asset conditions to be agreed, it said in there, must have water meters. So everybody has to agree that they're going to have water meters. Is that true?
No, that's not correct. So that might be an example of the type of standard that the shareholding councils might agree to, and maybe that was used for illustrative purposes, but I can assure you that we have not had a formal discussion around that definitely being a requirement for participation in a multi-council CCO. But it is an example of the sort of investment in standards that might be required. So if I can extend that a little bit further, you heard about 25% of the councils don't have existing consents around the country. Well, a requirement to be fully participating in a CCO might be you recognize the investment required to get all your consents applied, and then you start, having your equity in a multi-council CCO recognised. So both of those are the sort of quite complex financial arrangements that might be required to be worked through to agree on a final shareholding model, but it's definitely not something that has been established to this date.
Thank you. So you touched on the shareholding model. That was going to be my next question. It talks about, it says theoretical example, I must admit that. It says Council C. Now, when I looked at who Councils A, B, C and D might likely to be, and going from what was talked about earlier, I imagined we were C, and that Western Bay would be D. So we would only end up with a 10% shareholding, and yet Tauranga, Council B, would have 80% shareholding. And then it says later on, the default on decision making is 75% shareholding and 80% vote as the starting point. So immediately they would have more power. That's what I'm concerned about.
I think I can recall perhaps the table you're talking about. Look, it was very clear in the discussion, certainly that I've been involved in, that however the shareholding fell out, we absolutely didn't want to have a single or even a couple of councils that would dominate across the council. Now, we're getting right into the weeds here about constitutional arrangements for a potential CCO. The discussion here isn't at that point yet, but what I will say is that that's up to the participating councils to shape how those constitutional decisions get made. So whether you need 75% shareholders or 75% of the councils. So there was, if you look through that pack, you might see some decisions that went on shareholding percentage, and others went on the number of shareholders. So every council would get one vote in that case. So look, that's very detailed CCO constitution design, which we haven't done. But we've tried to identify what are the principles that might apply. And so what we've agreed on is much more general than that.
So it's a long way to go.
In my view, yes.
Thank you.
And there appear to be no further questions, so we'll go to the financial modelling. Oh, sorry, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just looking at the slide you've got up there, Stavros, by the way, thank you for this presentation. You must have a crystal ball because this answers all the questions that I was wondering about with my first question this morning. It says up there, for disadvantages, options 1 and 2 may not achieve benefits of scale. Andrew's just told us, have you not, that the benefits of scale wouldn't actually apply to Rotorua because we're kind of a self-contained water system?
Thank you, Councillor Lee. I believe I said not all benefits of scale would apply. So, for example, the procurement of contractors, I believe benefits of scale might apply. I believe for the attraction of talent and development of a workforce, benefits of scale might apply. In terms of efficiency of reducing the number of depots you have, efficiencies of scale might not apply because you're not to service Rotorua, regardless of whether you're in a CCO or not, would still need to have a local depot, would still need to have staff and equipment based locally. So I think I'm reluctant to take all of the national modelling around efficiencies and automatically apply it to us, because as I said, some of those models have strong urban bias to them. So if you were amalgamating the various different Auckland councils, as was seen with water care, they might have consolidated physical depots. I don't know. But that would be logical and that would deliver some efficiencies. We wouldn't expect to see that efficiency here. However, when you're recruiting for a population that's for a customer base of 400 or 500,000 as opposed to a customer base of 78,000, yes, I would say there might be efficiencies of scale there in terms of developing a cadetship program, in terms of developing and training operators through the network. I would see some benefits there. So we haven't broken those out because I don't see those numbers broken out nationally, so for us to be able to apply some and not others. So most of our analysis is based not on assuming any efficiencies, but purely on looking at the financial benefits through the tools and the instruments provided in the legislation.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Peterson.
Sorry, Your Worship, I did have one other question. Thank you for your indulgence. Just regarding governance again. So can the decisions of a board, I'm talking about option 3, be vetoed by council, or is our only oversight with that model, which doesn't actually prevent the decisions being enacted, is that our only oversight to sack them if we don't like what they've done? But once it's done, it's done. We can't unwind those decisions, that's correct?
Councillor Patterson, there's a number of questions in there. I think I'll just answer one, which is to say that ultimately it is the board's decision. Council will not have a veto over specific board decisions. And it's important to note that in the briefings that we've had from DIO officials, one of the reasons that these water organisations will be able to have the 500% debt to revenue covenants is because decision making is insulated from elected members, and it's based on in theory, on a competence-based board. So that's something that's come through LGFA as a requirement, and that's why that's not available to water services that are retained in-house in councils.
Thank you.
And Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you to Manakura and through the Chair. Andrew, Stavros, thank you very much. Could I ask, how confident are you that if we formed, option 2 would probably be the best one. How confident are you that we could get local knowledge onto a board? Forgive me, for example, the airport, we have people with that expertise, obviously not in Rotorua, and they join us by Zoom, but are still, obviously take part on their board duties. How confident are you that we would be able to provide a board of 6, 7 people, whatever, and maybe a council representative? I don't know what your recommendations would be. How confident are you that we would be able to find that level of expertise available to us?
Really good question, Councillor O'Brien. I haven't looked into potential board candidates. Again, that's quite far down the track. It's a good question, particularly because the legislation, I believe, still contains a requirement to exclude elected members and staff of council from the board. So, look, that's a question that I've raised at DIA before about the potential pool of candidates. We haven't got a definitive answer. However, if I might, some of the answers in response to that question point to saying, well, just go to a bigger pool, and that's how you get a bigger pool of candidates. So I'm sorry, I don't have a direct answer for you, but I can share the response I've got from those questions.
Thank you. So it's possible that, I'm saying it's probable, let me put it that way, that at least, if we had a board of X amount of people, some would have to be out of town?
Can I very briefly, respond on the base of observation you see around CCOs around the country? A competent board of directors needs to have a combination of skills and knowledge, local knowledge, connections, networks, but also going to be competence on the subject matter of the services they provide. I think if you look around the country, you'll find a lot of board of governance. They try to have a mix of those. How successful they are is a different story. But I think it's too premature for us to try and design a composition of the board of directors. All I'm saying is that you do need to try to amalgamate and integrate a whole range of knowledge and skills and competences into a competent board of directors. And I don't think you can exclude out of area people simply because out of area people.
Thank you. Just a follow-up, if I may. So I asked, I'll come to this one first. Thank you for that answer, by the way. Could I ask you, if Tarawera came up tomorrow for the decision, let's say it hadn't been made by the previous council, if that came up today, or perhaps if Bay of Plenty Regional Council changed rules around Mamaku, who makes the decision whether reticulation goes ahead and how?
Well,
like we went out to the community
I think
and
it's,
said,
look,
how
I
does
think
that change? How would that under these models?
It's a hypothetical question, and I'll give you a hypothetical answer because the Tarawera decision was made by the standing council at that point in time. Or let's say Mamaku, who comes out under the stewardship of a new CCO. Then obviously, if the CCO has a statement of intent to expand reticulations into currently unreticulated areas of wastewater or drinking water supplies, or to comply with a regulation, then that board of directors have to make the decision to when and how to make the decisions of creating a new reticulation scheme, and they have to make decisions how they're going to fund it. Do they borrow the money? Do they fund it through rates and so on? So at that point in time, it would be a board of directors decision because it would be within their waters strategy they present, and between the exchanges of expectations, statement of expectations by the shareholding councils and their statement of intent. So once you made it, create a framework of accountability, then I would assume, and I'm pretty confident, it should be their decision.
So it would be, so forgive me, so if, let's just use Mamaku as an example, for example. Example's sake. If Bay of Plenty Regional Council changed rules, if we were under either 2 or 3, and the board says they wouldn't reach out the way we did to try and achieve the 75 or look at the options, they would determine what form the reticulation or whatever form would take. They would determine the cost, they would determine payments, etc., like that.
I think it's just a step back. I think it would be unlikely for a CCO board to make that decision without council, without shareholding councils indicating in the statement of intent, statement of expectation, and then having it reflected back in the statement of intent from the CCO to add reticulation to a community. And that's the sort of thing, that's the sort of threshold I think can be applied in the constitution of the CCO to say that matters of this scale or magnitude must come in the statement of intent rather than being decided by the board themselves.
Thank you, and I agree with you, and what you're saying makes sense, but I have a concern over who would determine the payment structure and time frame. That would be the CCO.
No, the CCO have to make the payment because they are in charge of the full financial revenue and expenditure of that company. And again, I would suggest, and again, we're just talking about a hypothetical scenario here, but if the Bay of Plenty Regional Council's regulatory decision has been done and properly done and tested, and it's a regulation, then obviously the community affected will ask the water services company to help them comply with the regulation. And then the second stage is how do we pay for it? So I don't know the answer to that, but obviously some discussions will take place.
All right, thank you for that. Thank you, Tamanakura.
Thank you. I've just got a quick question and then we'll go to Councillor Lee. You mentioned that you've adjusted to reflect the climatic events, and I just am really mindful that flooding is our biggest civil defence risk here in Rotorua. Has that been put into consideration in terms of looking at the multi-council owned water organisation? Because although some of us may be better off as we are, all it will take is one natural disaster, as we've seen in Hawke's Bay and other districts, and our city could be in really deep trouble. Is that the sort of climatic events that you've considered, the natural hazard side? which are more frequently occurring across the country, or just the more high intense and frequent rainfall that we're experiencing in general?
I think our long-term plan and our infrastructure strategy as a council has identified that risk. We have made provisions in our long-term infrastructure strategy and our LTP how to address it. And as you know, in terms of stormwater management, we've got the IEF program and other kind of interventions. So all we have made adjustments to it is that with the emergence of new regulations, we've made small adjustments to what we thought a couple of years ago was necessary. But when you look into the DIA's model for the multi-council CCO, they've used figures and information from all those councils in long-term plans. So I think it'd be very clearly an unbalanced option, a decision that if this community have made decisions prudently, especially to kind of anticipate in the future, and other TLAs have not made that decisions. And I think Andrew said it earlier, is that you should not assume that a community should agree to harmonization, i.e. transfer or allocations you have made in this community to go somewhere else because of an oversight. So I think these are risks we have to manage, but the assumption behind that is that every council's long-term plan and infrastructure strategy that informs a long-term plan has made prudent and appropriate decisions for their particular locality.
Thank you. And we'll take one final question from Councillor Lee and then we'll get into the financials.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor O'Brien. It's a very sensible line of questions, particularly if we look at the option 3 multi-council owned water organisation. I'm wondering whether a letter of expectation might say something like, we expect you to articulate the Tarawera scheme, or maybe a letter of expectation might say, we support reticulation in general. And then I'm wondering, if we've got a multi-council organisation, perhaps you'll have other councils issuing letters of expectation that say, we want to reduce spending and reduce investment in reticulation schemes. So there's a potential there for conflicting letters of expectation. How does that resolve?
Thank you, Councillor Lee. So I'll start off, but Saros might want to add. The legislation requires a combined statement of expectation. So it's envisaged, and again, it's not my legislation, it's central government legislation, I'm trying to understand it as well, is that there will be a shareholder forum whereby those inputs from the different councils are managed by representatives of the shareholders before it goes to the board. So it's not anticipated that it'd be up to the board to resolve any discrepancies or conflicts between the letter of expectations that the board receives from the shareholders. So there will be a forum. It's anticipated there'll be a forum, and that forum will resolve those discrepancies and then issue a statement to the board. In practice, I'm not quite sure how that's going to work. I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, the thing is, all I wanted to add to that is that, and again, talking the hypothesis here, if all participating shareholders had needs or issues that they wanted that entity to resolve it for them, and the entity does not assign some kind of degree of hierarchy of priorities and decide to do it all in one go, remember, there will be an economic regulator on board there, and they will be asking that CCO to demonstrate how they're going to fund those wish lists. So, it's not about stating an intention to do something without an ability to provide evidence that it's got a financial sustainable model to fund it. So, that's the whole point of the economic regulator.
Okay, thank you. We'll carry on with the financials.
Thank you, Rosanna.
Thank you. Just a preface to what I'm going to go through. When the DIA did their modelling, as has been said, they just took the LTP and they've put different funds from operations to debt ratios across them. So for a regional one at 8%, for ourselves it's 11%. And so that gave a series of results. What I'm going to show you has got the same trends, but we've included into the modelling the stuff that Stavros talked about earlier, so the phasing in of the fully funding depreciation and some of the other things that are Taumata Arawai and Commerce Commission levies, those sorts of things. So what the modelling's showing at the moment is that all three options are sustainably viable based on the current information. The key differences between the in-house division model and the CCO models is the different borrowing limits that apply and the practical impact these differences have on household charges. So by 2033-34, there's about a 4.6% difference in forecast average household charges, dropping to about 3.2% in 253-54. And these are primarily driven by financing efficiencies. The DIA modelling as well didn't look at economies of scale, and that it solely looked at the different funds from operations requirements, and I'll go through that in a minute, and then applied those to the different models. So the modelling of the in-house option sets revenue and therefore the charges to users based on two factors. One is the budgeted costs we've got, and the other is maintaining a debt to revenue ratio of 250% as per Council's financial strategy. For the CCOs, a different approach is used, and this is the funds from operations to debt. This effectively represents the operating profit minus depreciation, which is a non-cash expense. So if you think about your home finances, it's your income coming in, it's your general costs going out. What's left at the end of the day that you can use to finance your debt? So a higher FFO requirement means more revenue is needed to support a given level of borrowing. However, this needs to be balanced with how affordable the charges are. If debt increases, obviously the charges to the water users also increase. For the two CCO options, the target is to maintain an FF ratio of 8% for the regional CCO and 11% for the Rotorua Lakes Council CCO. This means that an RLC CCO would require more revenue, about the equivalent of 3% of debt, more than the Bay of Plenty CCO. The lower requirement for a regional CCO is based on the expectation that it will have access to more favourable lending terms than a single council CCO. Given the difference in average household charges between the three scenarios is 4.6% in 2033-34, and given margins of error, a decision on the options should not be based on numbers alone. The financial results of the modelling need to be balanced against non-financial advantages and disadvantages. There's been a little bit of talk. Is that going to flick to the next one? Can we get that to the next slide, please? Carry on waiting for that. So there's been a little bit of talk about that there's not a need for price harmonisation. A Bay of Plenty water CCO will be financially viable at LTP projected levels of revenue, debt and investment. So there is no requirement for price harmonisation or cross-subsidisation between districts to make the Bay of Plenty model work. Under a Bay of Plenty water CCO, participating councils will not have to rely on utilising the borrowing capacity from other councils' water services in order to deliver their capital investment programs. But when we can get this graph up, it'll show that if there is price harmonisation, and it did occur, the Bay of Plenty CCO model will be significantly more expensive for Rotorua water users than the in-house or Rotorua Lakes Council CCO model. Okay, here we go. I'll just get that. So if you have a look at this graph, so this is based on the DIA modelling. And so if you have a look, the lighter of the blue lines, the second to bottom one, is the projected water services bill per connection for Rotorua Lakes Council under a non-harmonised model. The dark green line in the middle is the average going through. So if you did harmonise, the gap between those two lines is what the increase would be for Rotorua Lakes Council, the Rotorua Lakes District.
I think the bottom line here that we need to appreciate here is that in this whole spectrum of multi-council organizations, there are overs and unders, there are high and lows. And if you want to harmonize it compared to where we are right now, Rotorua will pay slightly more than it currently pays because obviously you bring some prices down and some prices up.
I think we just need to be clear. This is a sub-regional model, so this one is not all of Bay of Plenty councils.
So sorry, this is the all.
No, this is the sub-regional model.
Okay, I'll just go.
So if you go back a slide,
that one. So that's the regional model.
This is 6 councils, and the next version is 4 councils.
Yeah. So where the lighter blue line. And if we flick to the next one, this was where it was modelled with the 3 Eastern Bay councils in Rotorua. It's a bit closer, but.
Yeah. So I think so to you, Madam Chair, just to highlight, this is one of the challenges with what we're trying to do. We're trying to look forward 10 years based on data that we have varying degrees of comfort are accurate for some of the other councils that have published their data on their long-term plans. The other important considerations, as Her Worship mentioned earlier, is around risk, because one of the issues that councils have is that where there's a high risk of a single event having significant damage to our infrastructure, whereas from an insurance perspective, the larger pool of participants you have in an insurance scheme, the greater the insulation any one individual has to that. So that's where the risk mitigation option of having multiple councils also is not shown up in the financial modelling, but is one of those intangibles that Stavros talked about earlier.
Okay. One of the key differences between the in-house division model and the CCO models is the different borrowing limits that apply and the practical impact those differences have on household charges. Under the in-house model, debt continues to be measured at a total council level and is limited to 250% of operating revenue under council's financial strategy, and there's a 280% limit under LGFA covenants. So this graph illustrates the increased debt headroom that RLC would achieve if its Three Waters debt was transferred to a CCO water organisation. Now this graph's based on using the LGFA covenant of 280% debt to revenue ratio and the 500% debt to revenue ratio that would be available to a CCO. And so you can see in the later years that the RLC's debt headroom would be greater, so from about 2028, 29. The period before that is a little bit difficult because of the amount of capital subsidies that are coming in, that are counted into the revenue. So if we look from 2028, 29, past the capital subsidies, that shows the gap. Council's current Three Waters debt is equal to about 390% of the Three Waters revenue. This is higher than Council's total debt to revenue ratio, as the Three Waters activities are more highly leveraged than other activities in Council. Council also carries significant non-Three Waters debt, and as a result it is constrained in its ability to borrow to fund any investment outside of projects already funded in its long-term plan. The high proportion of non-Three Waters debt means that a wholly owned CCO will have a reasonable amount of borrowing capacity to fund future investment without the need to increase revenue significantly. The increased debt headroom afforded by a CCO, though, needs to be balanced with how higher debt would be serviced and its impact on rates and prices for water users. That's the modelling.
Thank you. So just a quick question. Stavros, you mentioned that this will be funded by a targeted levy to be charged, which is about $400,000 going forward. Was that for a particular option, sorry, or?
No, the regulatory costs of the government would be distributed to each TLA, and our share on that distribution model for Rotorua community is about $400,000. Basically, we'll be charging to our annual Three Waters rates another $400,000, and now that money will be paid to the government to provide the regulatory services.
Thank you. And if you were to go multi-council,
I think
would
still
that only
going to
be
be,
one?
it will be reflecting, it would be, I think, proportional to the population and the areas, but we don't think it will be much any different to what we estimate to be currently.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the charges are based on the number of connections. So whether it is council or through a CCO, the charges will be the same.
We open up for any further questions. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. It seems to be the big carrot that we've been offered is this debt headroom, additional borrowing levels. And it just permeates through the whole conversation all the time. But does Rotorua Lakes Council need additional headroom to bring its Three Waters in line?
I would express my view. I think our long-term plan, as it stands at the moment, identified our major expenditures in those areas. We've got the upgrade of treatment plants, we've got upgrade of some water supplies, we've got the stormwater improvements for the next 10 years. So the modelling indicates that on the basis of our current long-term plan and infrastructure strategy, they need to borrow significantly more money to do more new projects or growth related projects is reducing. Having said that, at the same time is that the need for the council to undertake other projects outside the Three Waters, at this point in time, we know what it is, but in the next triennium or the triennium after, the council might have different views about it. So because the current Three Waters debt ratio is fairly, it's quite high, it constrains this council's ability to invest in another project or another activity that are outside the Three Waters in the future.
But, so to be clear, the Three Waters requirements going forward would sit within their current borrowing capacity, and it's only if somebody wants additional that it becomes a question mark.
I believe our financial strategy has mapped those borrowing needs as per our long-term plan and infrastructure strategy as best as we can at this point in time.
If I can just add a couple of things. I think the debt is not the only so-called carrot, and I don't think it applies equally to all councils. For us, I don't think that's a significant driver in the model, because as you said, that's been mapped out. I'm more concerned about the cost certainty of delivery over the next 10 years, and what we've taken from the long-term plan and applied is based on a whole lot of assumptions, which we know will change given the purchasing pattern in the country. So we've applied an estimate of cost to deliver water services based on the current models. And my concern is that if we have much more sophisticated competitors to our contracting and our recruitment market, then the cost for us on an OPEX year-by-year basis, which will go directly to customers, is at significant risk of changing over time. And unfortunately, I can't quantify that because it's a product of what else happens in the market. And so I don't, my advice to you is I don't think debt is the carrot here for this council at all. For me, it's about risk mitigation, both from what we've talked about in the purchasing market, but also from climatic events, where, if we were to experience the kind of impact that, say, the Hawke's Bay councils have faced, our ability to recover from that when, say, in 2029, when we're already hard up against our debt headroom, is going to be very limited. And that will be a really bad time to try and move into a CCO, because you'll get a really bad deal. So my advice to this council is much more around the opportunity and risk mitigation going for the future. It's not primarily about debt.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Te Manakura. Just before I ask my questions, just in regards to 400,000 to government, or what exactly, I'm still not 100% clear, but I'm not sure how much GST this council pays to government. Maybe Mr. Collet has a rough idea. I'm not sure how much GST the tourists that this city provides to government comes to over many, many years, that we hardly ever see any back. Putting all that together, when the Minister says that we should be looking at getting back to basics to stop rates rises, and now they're asking us for $400,000, my reply would be, you first. So, I'll leave that for another day, should he deign us with his presence at some point. My first question would be around is there possible, if option C was taken up, how would an exit strategy work if a future council said, no, we want out, for whatever reason?
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien. Quite a theoretical question. Certainly the CEs at a working level have been discussing that there should be an entry and exit pathway into a multi-council CCO. That's a way that it's fundamentally different to what the Labour government had proposed previously under the Three Waters reform, where there would be no exit pathway. I can't share any more details because we didn't flesh that out any further, but I can certainly, and that will certainly be one of the items we would need to flesh out and bring to you should I get direction to further engage in those conversations.
Thank you. Second question is, could I ask, how confident are you with the figures that we have from other councils? If councils have been underfunding their Three Waters, isn't it slightly misleading? It's no fault of ours, the numbers are the numbers. But if councils, whichever council, whether it's to the west or to the east, if we're looking to partnership either side, if they've been underfunding, then it's sort of, we could be setting ourselves up for a big, even if the harmonisation doesn't take part, because that will require more debt. So how do we protect ourselves through that? What's the government doing to help us?
Can I say that, remember that we are required to choose a model and create a service delivery plan and submit it to the DIA by September, this year. We would not know if the other councils' long-term plans, as they stand at the moment, are consistent with a good, sustainable, future for that. And the DIA have to do the auditing of those, of those LTPs against what they propose to be their delivery plan. So all we can say at this point in time is that we've used the financial information that the other councils' long-term plans contain, that will be extracted by the DIA to structure their financial modelling. But then the delivery plan, their delivery plan, if it goes to a multi-council agency, CCO, then that delivery plan has to be audited by the DIA to say, does it actually reflect a sustainable financial model? And that will be done after that plan is delivered in September. And I think what my chief executive was alluding to in the early stages is that, and I think Councillor Kai-Fong noted that too, is that it may be a prudent approach for Council to opt into a staged approach too, without compromising an ability to make some decisions at a later stage. So that's a consideration to be had.
Thank you. And could I just ask, if we went with option 2, which is the standalone CCO or COO, because it doesn't seem to be much control, just more of ownership, how would we consult for iwi and hapu representation? How would we go out and determine which is the best model for representation, whether that be a person on the board or board seats or however? How would we put that through?
I might just touch on your previous question first as well, and as to say, besides the DIA due diligence, before I would recommend any of this council enter into any shared ownership model with any other council, I'd get a very heavy-duty independent review of the financial status of any other councils we're participating with. So just as you would with any merger or acquisition, I think you'd get a PwC or a Deloitte or someone to go through and make sure that the financial disclosures that councils have provided are actually accurate and meet our standards. So that's another level of protection. To answer your second question, look, that's up to us as this council. If we were to do that, then over a period of time, we would workshop what those correct board representation or shareholder forum representations might be, and it would be up to this council to decide that. That level of specificity does not need to be in the water services delivery plan submitted to the minister by this September, as far as I understand.
Thank you, Tamanku. And just my final question is, I would hope that at some point, if we're talking with ministry officials, if we could seek a clarification or confirmation that the 280% stays, certainly for at least for me, a minimum of 10 years. I am concerned personally, if I was myself and listening to the comments coming from the current government, if I was withdrawing at least a third, maybe a quarter, maybe up to half for some councils of their services, certainly to stop extra spending elsewhere, that would certainly be one of the mechanisms I'd be withdrawing, certainly substantially reducing to stop runaway spending. So at the moment, I appreciate what our visitor said earlier this morning. There's no indication that the 280 changes, but if it does, I'd just be very wary of it myself. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll do that. Just to be clear, that LGFA sets that, which is actually a CCO. So we'll write to LGFA and get clarification on that. Yep.
I am mindful of time, and a number of us have 1 o'clock commitments. I just want to check, do councillors feel ready to do around the table of what your preferred option is, or I suggest we could finish off that conversation tomorrow after our annual plan discussions. Paul, tomorrow? Okay. So I might just wrap this up here. We'll start with any further questions tomorrow. But look, thank you very much to Stavros and to Russell for this presentation. We have had quite a lot of detail from our external presenters as well. Apologies to anyone who will be live streaming. We will finish off this discussion focusing on what preferred options will be tomorrow. We have a council meeting that's starting at 1 o'clock, but we will likely pick up this conversation about 2 p.m. tomorrow. So it's 2 p.m. tomorrow, 5th of March, for anyone who's wanting to tune in. Thank you very much, everyone. And I might just ask Councillor Waru if you could close us with a karakia.
Kia tau kia tātou katoa te ata whai o tō tātou wari ki Ukraiti. Me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu ake, āmini.
Āmini. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll just adjourn the workshop for now.